Hey, Kate. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good. How about yourself? Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. Let's dive right in and start with, I thought it might be helpful and maybe clarifying to start with what mental toughness is to begin with. You know, that term, as I'm sure you know, and experience, gets tossed around a lot, and we talk about it in lots of different circles. But yeah, run me through, or maybe just define that from your perspective to set the stage for our conversation today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like what you said, that term gets thrown around a lot, especially in the world of sports. And I think it's not helpful when it's just kind of thrown out there as you need to be more mentally tough, or, you need to build some mental toughness. Because what does that really mean? Like what you just said, what is mental toughness? And the way that I look at mental toughness, it's a combination of so many things. It's a combination of attitudes, behaviors, actions, mindset, perspective. It really is, in one sense, probably pulling together all facets of mental performance to help you to become mentally tough. And I think, when we're trying to maybe develop that, we have to get more specific and clear on what exactly it is that we need to develop. Is it, behaviors we need to develop? Is it an attitude or a mindset that we need to develop? And to look at it from a broader perspective, so that it's not just about maybe going through something physically difficult. Because I think a lot of time that's what people think of with mental toughness is, I did this really physically challenging endeavor, and that's going to build my mental toughness, which I think it can. But I think at the same time, when I look at my clients and my approach, there's other ways you can build mental toughness, like through meditation. To sit there for 30 minutes and be quiet and still is very, very difficult. And in one sense, that would be, helping you be mentally tough, because you're having to learn to be still, which for most athletes is very hard because they're always in that doing mode. So I think it's such a broad term, and you got to really narrow it down. And it really is just a combination of so many different things.
If we maybe back up to your experience with mental toughness, I'm curious to learn more about what brought you to this field in general and this topic. I know you have a history as a hockey player and went through your own journey with mental toughness, and like you said, the combination of all of those different facets of what that is. But maybe just walk us through kind of that early experience for you, because I think that's such a fundamental part of for so many of us. Is just those early stage experiences and those things that led us to where we're at now. So yeah, what was your, what was that like for you early on as an athlete, and ultimately how did that inform your journey to where you're at now?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, it's interesting because, as I mentioned, there's so many different facets. And I think in one sense I had what a lot of people would consider mental toughness, especially early on in my athletic journey. I was very hardworking. I got cut from my first team when I was probably 8, and my focus was then, great, let's just work harder and dig in. And so my ability to be resilient when I was pretty young, because it was not the most smooth path, I should say. Because when I started playing hockey as a female in the late 80s, there really wasn't much female hockey. So I had to play with the guys. And so that itself is not as easy. I was very fortunate that I had some teams and parents and guys on my team that really welcomed me. But when you're the only female playing on a male team, right, I think that itself kind of forges a little bit of that mental toughness, because you kind of have to just focus on yourself and not listen to what people might be saying as being the only girl. And so there was a lot of different obstacles: getting cut, figuring out how to transition to playing female hockey, not maybe getting scouted at times the way that I wanted to for, whether provincial or national programs. But I think at the same time, while I had that one component of ability to really bounce back every time I got knocked down, I came back and just focused on working harder. I think at the same time, part of that other facet of mental toughness, which is, I guess, more of a holistic approach to it, which was to not just go, 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 but there is a requirement to, take care of your mental, physical health. I didn't really have when I was younger. And I think that's something I learned and became much more understanding around the importance of it as I got closer to the end of my career. And I think then that eventually started to maybe round out some of those other areas of mental toughness. And then I think obviously when I transitioned away from being the athlete, I kind of started to navigate what did I want to do afterwards, and eventually I found myself into the mental performance component of the equation, because I think that was just more resonated with me, and I have more passion for it than working with athletes on the physical side, which I actually did initially do when I first graduated and stopped my my athletic career.
What I want to talk a little bit about nuance, because you mentioned there's so much more to mental toughness than what we are maybe told or even sold, because it has become popularized in this. It's a lot of it is just kind of put your head down. And you mentioned your first reaction is to, I'm just going to work harder. My answer to being tough is just to outwork everyone else. But you've gotten, in your own journey, and then obviously in your work, there's so much that goes into it. And so for those that maybe are thinking about mental toughness through that lens still of, it just means I need to do something physically hard to be tough, or I need to just put my head down and do more. What role does nuance play in that conversation to get us to a place where we have that holistic perspective, like you just mentioned?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's a conversation I have with a lot of my clients, and helping them to try and make that shift. And it's not always easy, especially if they're pretty young, because as you said, there's that we've been sold and told, and a big part of the mindset around athletics is, just put your head down, grind it out. I remember having a T-shirt, no pain, no gain, right? That kind of mentality, right? That's being tough. And I think you have to just slowly start to create that conversation and connect the benefit of doing things like meditation or sleep. That recovery component is really, really important. And there are more subtle ways to build not only that toughness, but your overall performance, and that those other areas ultimately help you when you are now going to go do and grind it out, which has to happen sometimes. It's going to make that even better. And I think that's really what I try to emphasize with, people I talk to, my clients, is that this one side of kind of being a little kinder to yourself, a little more holistic, will help you now really, get that, I guess, a little bit more, I don't want to say toughness, but really help you when you get into having to really grind it out or perform at a really high level in difficult situations.
How do we know when to deploy these different skills? And what I mean by that is, how do we know when it's time, or the right time, to put our head down and lean in and do the hard work? Because that's absolutely a part of it. To excel at anything, there is a point at which you have to push through where you're currently at. You have to get to a new place, and that requires effort. But then there's some of these other skills you've talked about where, whether it's meditation or recovery or, any of the other facets of the kind of athletic toolbox that we might deploy, or even outside of athletics, just people in general. So how do you help people, or what's the guidance for finding that balance of, now's the time to just lean in and work hard, or just on the other side of that is things like burnout and overtraining, and and there's mental and emotional health that's factored into that. So yeah, what's that like for you, and maybe what's been your experience, if any, like on the client or personal side with that, trying to find that balance?
I think that's a continuous journey. I know, like, I'll talk about myself personally, and I think, and then I'll extend it to my clients. I think personally, it's a constant journey to try and find that balance of, push hard. And I think part of it, and it's the same with my with my clients, is that's really, really important, is your self-awareness, right? And to be super self-aware and to build that, because I know for myself, finding that balance or knowing when to push or when to, recover or step back or do other things that, are part of the equation, it really does stem from my self-awareness. Like I know my tendency is to go hard and to dig in and to just throw myself in doing more. So I know that usually is going to probably not be an issue in one sense, right? Like the doing part. It's more of maybe sometimes taking that step back and being more mindful or doing more self-reflection or whatever that looks like. And I think then for me, I know that's something I have to focus a little bit more on and find that, I guess, balance. But I think, as I said, like the ability to know time and place and when is like you're just constantly learning that, I think, as you go through your own journey and figure yourself out. And so that's something I do with my clients as well, right? I have to help them develop that self-awareness and help them to know themselves and what are their tendencies, maybe when they're up against the wall, when there's pressure, when they're stressed, like what are they going to tend to do, and then help them to fill in those gaps of other things they need to throw into that equation, to make sure that they are having a nice, well-rounded approach for themselves and finding as much balance as possible.
I feel like confidence has to play a role in this in some way, and maybe it's confidence through the lens of self-awareness, being confident enough in your or our ability to navigate these different things. But I know that's one of the things that you've talked about in your books is confidence and tools for building it. So what role does it play? Because I know that you can be overconfident and that can lead to injury and burnout, all these things that I mentioned before, but it has to play a role somehow, I would imagine. So what's that equation look like for confidence in the right doses and ultimately leading us to where we want to be in the end?
Yeah, confidence super super important I think at the core of most things. The same with self awareness. I kind of, in one sense, couple those together because you need self awareness to really build that confidence, and that confidence then does influence so many other things, right? And what's that balance? I think for most people I've worked with and I've seen, whether they're professional athletes, Olympic athletes, or high school athletes, is most people need more confidence, and not even need more confidence. They need to shift how they're getting their confidence. So most athletes get confidence from outside of themselves, from winning or succeeding, getting points, getting accolades, external validation in some way, shape, or form, right? And that's going to be fleeting because that's going to come and go, and that's not going to really create steady, long lasting confidence. And so how do we now shift it to, yeah, those things are nice and they should definitely make you feel good, but they should be more of that icing on the cake versus the main ingredient of what you're looking to have for your confidence. And so we have to shift it to focusing on the things that they need to develop within them to help them consistently have confidence and have that steady, long-lasting confidence when their external environment and things are going to be fluctuating. It's going to go up and down. You're in a sport. You're going to have good moments, good seasons, bad moments. Like, how do you can maintain that confidence? And so things like preparation is a big part of that internal confidence, as well as certain mental skills such as self-talk. Self-talk is definitely one of the most important mental skills when it comes to internal self-confidence. So that relationship with yourself and how are you talking to yourself, and then really focusing on small successes. I think that's a big thing. Most people are looking for the big wins, the big successes to make themselves feel good, but really to have continuous steady confidence, you have to be looking daily at those small things, those small victories that you accomplished, and then finally really training in adversity, right? Because that's a big part of confidence, is to know that you can head into an unknown and you can deal with whatever obstacle or challenges are going to get presented to you, and you learn to know that you can, and to trust yourself that you can, by doing it in other environments, right? And that's why I think throwing in that training in adversity. When it comes to the people I know who go a little bit maybe on that edge, they're getting to and I've had that question from clients too, like, how do I know if I'm just really confident or if I'm getting into that overconfidence? And I think the main ingredient that helps you to stay on the side of just being very confident versus overconfident is being humble. right? And I think that's the biggest thing, is just kind of staying grounded, staying tied to the ground, and understanding that things may be going well, but you don't stop the process. You don't stop focusing on those small things that helped you get to be successful. You look at some of the best athletes in the world, right? They're big proponents of the fundamentals of continually doing the small things that they did when they were 14 years old, all the way through until they retire, right? And I think that's the biggest thing, is not losing sight of those small things, and not getting too, I guess, in your own head, and getting ahead of yourself.
I want to maybe dive a little deeper there, because this is something that I talk a lot about on this podcast, and it's a personal passion of mine. And it really is tied to this, process oriented approach, that the real fact that, like you said, these other things are fleeting. It's the game, it's the win, it's these moments in time, these outcome based scenarios. They're here today and they're gone tomorrow. And then ultimately it's a connection to the process that, keeps us sustainable. But I find, and I'm curious if you have the same experience on your side of working with athletes, but certainly one of the challenges of my career as a coach has been to highlight the importance of finding real excitement and a real connection to the process. That, that thing down the road is great, but it's not going to be as satisfying as you think it's going to be, and it can also go any number of different ways, and it's largely out of our control. So I'd love to just just to maybe dig a little deeper into some of the tactical pieces that you found to create that connection to the process, or how do we help people understand what those small wins are? How do we identify them? Because I just think a lot of people, again, in my experience, they're almost kind of, they get a little stuck in purgatory. They can't quite see the forest for the trees and what it might look like on a daily basis to truly connect with that process in some meaningful way. So yeah, walk us through just some more detail on that, and how folks can connect to it.
Yeah, I think what you said, that is always the difficult part, is how do you make someone excited about the process, or that small win. And I think, like anything, it is a practice, and part of that is when you start to, as you said, be able to identify it more and more. I think you do get excited, because really, when you look at things like the flow, when they've done research on the happiest people, it's all about being truly connected to that moment, and that moment itself is fulfilling enough, right? People who are happy or in the flow, they're not looking for something outside of that moment, right? And so I think that's the biggest thing, to understand and to illustrate, that being primarily focused and putting all your energy and focus into that step you're taking in that moment is going to give you everything you actually want, is so important, but as you said, very hard to do. And so I actually have all my clients write out 3 wins every day, 3 small wins or small victories every day. They have these journals that I give them. And it's a practice, because I know for a lot of them it's very difficult. They're like, I don't know. Like, I don't know how I'm going to find 3 wins in a day. And slowly they start to, because I start to, you ask questions of, it can be anything. It could be, did you not lose your I guess, temper in a situation where usually in the past maybe you would have? It could be the fact that for these people, when I'm having them write in the journals, that they wrote in the journals that they completed the journal that day, right? That could be a small win, because maybe that's something, if they meditated for 5 minutes, that could be the small win, because maybe that's not something they're usually going to be doing, or they're just at the beginning of doing it. So I think it is hard, because when we're looking at the small wins, we don't think of them as wins. We just think of them as, well, of course I should have done that. And I think that's maybe a place to kind of look at, if there's something in your daily life where you're like, well, yeah, of course I should have done that. That might be an area to start to explore of a small win, because in one sense, you didn't need to do that at the same time. Every decision you make is going to send you in one direction or the other. It's either going to, be a vote for the athlete or person who you want to become, or a vote for the athlete and person that's gravitating away from that vision you have for yourself. And I think that's important to notice that each moment is a moment to make a decision, and that itself is a small win if you make the decision that's going to help align you with what you ultimately want to do.
That's so good. I certainly resonate with that on a personal level. It's been a real practice of mine to to stay present and focus on small wins. I'm someone who's always striving and I could do better, and that you captured it really well. That sentiment of like, well, of course, like I should have done that anyway, right? Like that's not that big a deal because it's low hanging fruit, or it's I was going to do it anyway, or whatever. And yeah, that resonates, and it's something that you have to work at, and it's the days that I don't do it, or don't make that a practice, it's really evident, in terms of just how I feel about progress or my connection to the things I'm doing. And so that's great. Again, that really, I can really like feel that on a personal level, because it's been like a journey for me to just be excited about what's going on right now versus like always pushing ahead and be like, oh, okay, I just got to do better tomorrow. But you talked about, you just touched on this kind of like, you make a decision, right? There's like divergent paths you can take. You can make a decision to support that person, or you can make a decision to not, support that person you want to be, and it leads me to a quote that I really like, and I know you've publicized or is out there in your book, Get Into the Zone, and I just want to read it. It says, "Every day that you wait to start training your mind is a day that your competition is leaving you further and further behind. And one day they will have moved so far ahead that you'll simply be unable to keep up." And I think that quote feels like kind of what you're describing, is like you can go this one direction, and you can decide to support this person that's fully engaged and is connected to this process, or not. But the people that do are going to move ahead. They're going, there's sustain. So, but I'd love for you to expand on what that quote means, or like the sentiment around that as it relates to the importance of this in general, and how it does ultimately like create a sustainable approach, or one that's wholly unsustainable oftentimes when we're not working on these mental performance skills. So what's your connection to that quote, and what does that mean for you?
It's a good question. I wrote it quite a few years ago now, but I think for me it really is just trying to emphasize the importance of the mental side. And I think there was a part of me when I was young that kind of intuitively did a lot of things that helped me, and a lot of the stuff we've talked about and contributed to my overall performance through, the mental side. But I don't think I really connected it until I got older, and it was towards the end of my career, and I started to really realize how much it influenced my performance. And I think the more and more I've worked with athletes over the years now, so many athletes now have the same strength, conditioning, coaching ability, or access, or nutrition. Like everything has on the physical side it's available, and eventually all athletes get pretty equal. If you're at the top of your sport, there's not much that's going to differentiate the athletes from a physical perspective, or even the athletes that maybe were just below it, like just didn't make it, right? It usually is not going to come down to a physical skill set if you're really that good, or in that kind of top part of the sport that you're in. And what's really going to be the difference is what's going on between your two ears. And I think that's really, what I've noticed, and that was the whole quote, is just to say, like, you have to pay attention to this. You have to put in the same time and effort into your mental game and into your mental performance that you do your physical side. Because if you don't, your physical skills aren't going to be able to give you what you want by themselves. They won't. And those that are working on both their physical and mental game are going to get way too far ahead of you, that eventually just said, like, there will be no way to catch up, because at some point you come to the point where you're not going to be able to make that next level if you're not focusing on it. And so I think that was the big thing, is to help people just to understand that you have to build this out to really truly get the most out of all that physical training that you have done. And if you don't, then you're not going to get the most out of it.
What's the takeaway, or is there an opportunity to apply that same lesson to folks that aren't at an elite level? Because I work with a lot of, and I'm sure you've encountered this as well, and I know you work with people in kind of the professional space. I spend a lot of time in the entrepreneurial space, and folks trying to balance all these different things and figure out, which direction to go with their business and this, that, and the other. And I feel like that resonates. But I'm curious to get your take on, like, how does that distill down, or what's the takeaway there for folks that are just trying to balance a million different things, right? Physical health, they have families, job, right, whatever the things are that people wake up and are managing. What's the importance of the mental performance piece for those folks? If performance isn't athletic performance at a very top level isn't their end goal, how do they still, what's the role of that for them? How do they still apply these tools?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it applies in the same manner in terms of to get the most out of yourself, whatever that is, whatever that context is for you. If it is balancing life, it is your work. If it's playing athletics at maybe a lower level, and you're not looking to go pro or college or whatever that might be, it's really always saying, like, are you wanting to get the most out of what you are attempting to do, to put your best foot forward in every situation? And you said, even the people who are trying to balance all these things, do you want to be able to do so from a perspective of being able to stay calm and resilient and mindful and present with whatever it is that you're doing, whether it's work or with your children or whatever that might be. I think that ultimately is do you want to see what capacity you have, and you have to kind of train your mind to be able to do that, because it impacts your confidence, your attention, all of these things that are going to ultimately impact how you end up doing whatever that endeavor is for you.
It makes me think about these folks, and I know it's important, at kind of the high level too, but talking about people with lots going on gets me thinking about this kind of varied athletic identity. And I know that's something that you've talked about specifically, your book, The Athlete Within, um, just the importance of diversifying outside of athletics, and not hanging your hat solely on performance or your preparedness or athletic abilities or what have you. Um, can you expand a little bit on that, and the importance of having some diversification there as it relates to how we think about ourselves?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's greatly important from two different perspectives. One perspective of actually being able to be a high level performer, again, whatever that might be for you. And then number two, help you, obviously a lot for athletes transition, whether that's after high school, college, professionally, right? That transition is going to happen at some point, regardless of how high a level you ended up playing. And I think, from going back to the perspective of getting the most out of yourself, I think it's important to have things that help you to understand that this thing that you are putting maybe a lot of time, energy, and effort into is just something that you are doing. And yes, you are putting a lot of time, energy, and effort into it, but it's not who you are. And I think when you look at diversifying, and whether it's hobbies or interests, or exploring maybe what you want to do after your role as an athlete, it just helps you to understand and remind you that there's more to life than this thing you're putting so many hours and time behind, and you can do that, but don't let it become your identity, and understand that there's more to you. And when that thing is done, whenever it is done, you are still going to exist, and everything that you gain from that time will come with you. And I think that's really important. And then that's going to help also with that transition period, because I think for a lot of athletes that is extremely difficult, that transition, whenever it does end up happening, if their whole identity was that sport. I think there's still going to be a transition because it still is something you put a lot of time, energy, and effort into. But I think those athletes who understand that this is something they're doing, not who they are, can then see what they've gained from it, and can, at some point they've started to think about and focus on what is life going to be like afterwards, and how is this a stepping stone to what I'm going to do next. And that obviously then helps with that transition, because now you're finding purpose and value in something else that you're doing, and now you can kind of close the book on that chapter, and take from it what you wanted to, and helped you, and now move on to something else.
Would you be willing to share a bit of your personal experience with that? Because I can't help but think, I mean, you've gone through that, and we learn the best when we maybe use ourselves as as our own experiment. But how was that something that you arrived at fairly naturally, or did you struggle with that diversified identity, or what was that like for you as you moved even through different stages of your hockey career, but then ultimately parlayed that into ultimately what you're doing now? What was that like for you?
Yeah, I think it was difficult, but I had some advantages that I think did help me transition at the same time, and so I'll kind of go over all the different, I guess, things, the aspects that were a little more difficult, and that was beneficial. I think for me, my identity was being an athlete. A large part of it was hockey, but just sports in general was a big part of my identity. And so, for me, when I was transitioning, I was in my 20s, when I was in my 20s, and I become very, very good at this thing. When I started to now figure out, what I was going to do next, it's very hard to go back to the beginner stage, right? To be not good at something. And I know for me, when I retired, it was at a time where technically I still could have kept going, and I could have, continued with hockey. And so there were definitely moments in the first, I think, 2 or 3 years where I was like, I don't know, it'd be kind of nice to go back and do the thing I'm really, really good at right now. Because, when you hit those low points, for me, especially, I was starting a business and doing some things that were very difficult. It was, that idea of like, oh, let's just go back to the thing I'm like really, really good at. That sounds enticing. That would be nice, right? That was definitely hard at times, that, thinking of like, will I ever be as good as I was at this, thing that I stopped in my 20s? Will I ever get that good at something else? And I think that can be hard for a lot of athletes. Now, for me, being a female athlete, and a hockey player, at the time that I was in the, I guess, era of women's hockey, where getting paid to play was not really a reality. And yes, going to the Olympics was a reality, but again, you're not going to get paid to go to the Olympics. I always had to have in the back of my mind what was after hockey. And so I remember starting at about 17, starting to think about what was I going to do for my living. Like I thought about being a sports agent. I thought about being a gym teacher, and I explored those different options. I thought about doing sports management. That was actually my first major in undergrad before I, changed to psychology in my second year. And then even when I graduated from undergrad, right, I did physical training. I did something called muscle activation techniques for a little bit. So there was a lot of exploration of like, what am I going to do? Because I knew that I still had to figure out a way to make money, even if I was going to continue to play hockey and maybe go to the Olympics. And so I think that in one sense helped me, right? That was valuable. And obviously female athletes generally have that a little bit, maybe more, just because there's not as many opportunities to get paid for the sports. And so I think that was helpful. So I already kind of knew when I was graduating and finishing hockey, some ideas, and started to throw myself into things that I might want to do next, and have purpose and value, and be passionate about something else. And I think that was really, really important, and really helped with that transition. but yeah, like definitely my identity was very wrapped around being an athlete, and I experienced burnout and all these things. So I think there was a mixed bag there where there were some difficult components, but some things that did help me and made my transition maybe a little bit easier than for some.
What are ways that you help, or, maybe what's your advice or guidance for folks um, that are struggling with that? And again, I'll bring it back, or my mind goes to what I'll kind of maybe call like age group athletes. A lot of folks that we work with, like in my coaching company, um, again, are there, they're doing some sport at the best of their ability. But it almost seems like diversification of identity um, might be worse at that level than at elite levels, because there seems, maybe it's, I don't, and you could speak to that more than I can, but we work with, there's a lot of folks that I talk to on a daily basis that are super passionate, but they're weekend warriors. They have kids and work and this, that, and the other, and but they really struggle to figure out a zone to place their energy outside of athletics, and that becomes very destructive when they get injured, or they have something else come up in their life, or they have to redivert, or whatever the scenario is. Pick a thing that happens in life that throws a curveball our way. So not necessarily for those people, but what's your advice or tactical guidance to help people figure out how to get somewhere else, or how to connect with some other version of themselves outside of that outside of their athletic identity?
Yeah, I guess the thing that comes to mind is exploration. I think that's the thing people don't do. And I mentioned it when I said, like, that's what I kind of did. And that was, I don't know why I did it. It was, I guess, an intuitive thing. But I think you have to explore. And I think people are afraid to find out what they don't like, but they don't understand that finding out what you don't like or doesn't fit with you or doesn't align with you is information to help you eventually find what you actually do like, or is in alignment with you. And I think that's really, really important. And maybe, I think that was maybe something my dad might have taught me, because I remember my brother, when he was in undergrad, was doing all these different internships and not liking them. And he's like, that's fine, because now you just, you knock it off, and you're figuring out what you do like through what you don't like at the same time. So I think that's really, really important. It's the same with, young kids. And I tell that to parents with young athletes, like, even just exploring different sports. I think sport specialization is huge now. And I think just the whole exploration, whether it's a sport or different hobbies or interests, outside of, if you're a weekend warrior, I think that's just really important, is just start to open yourself, be curious, and be open-minded, and just start to explore different things that maybe at some point in your life had what you were interested in. Whether it was maybe guitar when you were a teenager, or piano, maybe you took piano lessons and maybe you liked it, but you just didn't have time, or you did something else, whatever it might be, right? Just start with something and just kind of explore it, be open-minded. And it's okay if you don't like the first few things that you're exploring, because now you're getting information, starting to maybe filter through and narrow down eventually what's going to fit for you outside of athletics.
You touched on, when you're talking about your own experience with kind of transitioning outside of or on the other side of playing hockey, that it's hard to be bad at things, and that totally resonates with me. I've said openly that I don't like to do things I'm bad at, as I don't think many people do. Certainly, people that are competitive or fall into this kind of general camp of, athlete, we're high drivers, tend to like to do, be good at things. I think that's a fair assumption. But I have found, as I have developed, and I'll speak to my personal experience with this to kind of highlight my broader question. I've found that as I've diversified and kind of matured as an athlete, and my athletic journey has, transitioned and ebbed and flowed, and the role that athleticism plays in my life changes, I've found that it's really important to make things that I'm not good at part of my process. And I'll use an example. something as maybe seemingly simple as like mobility work, right? I come from a cycling background where I have lots of wrecks and broken bones and crashes and things that I have to maintain as I get older to continue to move well. So what that means is that my body doesn't necessarily like those things. I'm not good at them, right? I'm not, at any given day, I don't look particularly flexible, or I don't, feel like I'm super capable of doing some of these things. And that's just one example, but it's critical and imperative to my process. And I have found that when I think about something like that I'm not good at, but I think about connecting to the act of trying to get better at that thing as something that is part of my process, right? So it's not like my inherent ability to do the thing, but it's the engagement in the thing itself that keeps me excited about it or keeps me coming back to it. So I use myself as an example again to highlight like how do we lean into stuff that we don't like, or what is your advice or guidance for people that when we need to diversify, or there's parts of our process that maybe need to be in place but we shy away from them because they're not a strength, or we don't feel confident, to come back to the confidence piece there. How do you what's your process or your guidance for getting people engaged in those things and not continuing to kind of redivert and shy away from them to only choose things that they're kind of strengths?
It's a good question. It's that whole conversation around the importance of putting yourself in uncomfortable situations, right, and getting comfortable with the discomfort. And I think it's a conversation I have with all of my clients from different perspectives. Obviously, one of the perspectives I give it is to actually inevitably find flow. You have to actually have struggle. You have to have discomfort. And so again, it's trying to connect why is this important to your overall performance. That's usually the angle I have to and I like to take, right? Because I think they have to understand how's this going to aid me. It's same with what I said about the confidence earlier, training in adversity. Same thing. That's going to put you in an uncomfortable situation. And through being put into that uncomfortable situation, like what you're saying with your mobility, you learn how to deal with discomfort, which ultimately down the road, when you're placed in a situation in maybe a competition or a game or something that you're really wanting to do well in, there's going to be a moment of discomfort somewhere there. And if you've purposely done it earlier and learned how to just navigate through that discomfort and to not get caught up or hooked by the discomfort or the thoughts that come with that, that's going to help create the skill set to now do it in that bigger moment, or that moment when you need to or want to. And so I think that's kind of how I do that. It's trying to say maybe start small and then build, like start with something small that's uncomfortable, and then maybe build it to something bigger, and learn how to be okay with that feeling that is being created, and use it as a moment to practice a lot of the things that for me I'm trying to teach them so that they can now perform it at a high level when they need to.
Yeah, I love that question. Like, why is this important to your performance? I think that's probably a missing piece, or a question we don't ask enough, and because it feels like it's worthless, right? Like, if specifically, my mind goes to these things that are kind of secondary or tangential to like our primary modality or primary training discipline. It's like all the other things, they're not helping me, right? Is what often is in the athlete's mind. We don't get that as much anymore, but we used to have that big fight with like strength training, right? It's like, if you're a whatever athlete, you're like, well, why am I going to spend time in the gym? I'm just going to go do more of my thing, right? And coming from the endurance space, it was an uphill battle. And luckily we have science to support, that it's actually not, something we should shy away from now. But it's like, I'm just going to go run more. I'm just going to go ride my bike more, or whatever. And I think, yeah, it's just a great way to frame it. Is like, oh, it's actually like, this thing's going to help my performance. It's actually going to support, these areas that I do want to spend most of my time and energy, but maybe I shouldn't spend all of them there. I should work on bolstering some strengths.
Mm-hmm.
I want to take a bit of a divergent path, but in my mind, it's all related. One of the things that I'm always fascinated by is this kind of common thread between mental toughness and sport and business, or sport and like our career paths. And it's something that I've talked a lot about, in the sense that the skills that we gain in the athletic world are directly applicable to how we show up in the professional space. You could be a business owner or not, but if you're someone who's trying to, move the needle in the professional way, those things I believe are inexorably linked. But I'd love to get your thoughts on what that common thread is between those two worlds, and how mental toughness is woven, or part of that common thread, or woven into that narrative, or that intersection between those two spaces.
Yeah, no, so I think there's a huge thread from both former athletes going into the business world, right, and transferring those things. And then I also know that, people in the business world who maybe weren't athletes love to learn about the secrets the athletes use to be mentally tough, or to be able to, focus better, or whatever that might be. I think for me, it's always about, just because of my profession and performance, right? If you're in the business world, you are still trying to perform in some way, shape, or form. And I think if you were an athlete, you're going to pull a lot of those things that you need to be able to perform in whatever it is you're doing in business, whether it's communication or teamwork, self-awareness, knowing that you can do difficult things, knowing that you can overcome obstacles, challenges, figure that out, become better for it, right? Sports is all about failure. You're failing all the time in sports. When you go lift weights, you are technically getting to the point of failure, right? Like, so that's the whole point. So you're just constantly failing. And I think that itself now gets transferred into business, to be able to deal with some of those things, especially if you're, let's say, an entrepreneur or something like that, or if you had to deal with coaches and now you have a boss, right? Again, you have all these different transferable skills that are going to help you to excel in the business world, just as much as the athletic world. And I think, again, that goes to what I was saying earlier with that transition of, if you can grab it and really see what that journey or that time period of being an athlete really built within you, that now goes with you as you now enter into that next stage of your life, if it is business or something else. And now it's just about figuring out, how do I apply these same things and approach this in a similar way? Because I think that's sometimes where people don't see it. And I was a little different. I was talking to one of my clients yesterday who's a student athlete. And so we were talking about her taking a test, and kind of a similar thing. We've gone over these different tools and techniques to help her. She's a softball player, with her batting, and just kind of keeping her emotions in check and staying calm. And I said, you get to use some of those skills for test taking, right? You can, talk to friends, listen to some music, like do something that kind of calms you down, makes you laugh, makes you loose, so that when you walk into that test, you're calmer. Because as soon as you start getting stressed and you let that stress take over, it's going to impact how much information you're going to remember for that test. And so that's kind of similar with the business. You have to really look at and see, like, what did I develop, but then how do I now apply it over here into this different context? But you can.
I love that. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think there's, we tend to like think about those things like they're in vacuums, right? It's like, okay, here's this world, and then here's this world, and there's no possible bridge. But yeah, I love, just your kind of explanation of that, those real direct crossovers, right? And like in so many different spaces, whether it's working with teams, communication, self-awareness, these things that, when you wake up in the morning and you go to work, you have to deploy so, this suite of kind of interpersonal skills and self-awareness and connection, and how you deal with others. And all of that is in athletics, all that, whether it's training groups or, what we've done on our own. And I appreciate you making that common thread super clear.
One thing, actually, I'll just add to that. And I think it was a podcast I listened to a long time ago, because the way we view athletics has changed quite a bit over the years, right? The whole point of athletics, like, long ago, before it became really like something you can make a lot of money off of, the whole point of it for young people was to build character for whatever they were going to do as adults. that was the whole point of people actually doing athletics. And I think we've lost that along the way, where now it's about, oh, I can get a scholarship, I can go pro, I can make millions of dollars. But ultimately, that was the whole reason we were put into athletics in the first place.
I honestly had never really thought about, rolling back the clock a little bit and thinking about, that the goal was that it originally was that it supported who we were external to that thing. It wasn't just about sport in general, or sport as a standalone piece. That's a great thing to recognize, is that, that the engagement in that thing is really should be what supports, like, bolsters who we are. The other, and I describe it, I've talked about it, like it's the other 23 hours of the day, right? It's like, and however long your training session is, or however long you're engaged in that sport, but then you go off and you're a person in the world. You move through society, and you have a family, and you're a brother or a sister or a partner, whatever, right? And that you're going to carry that into all those other engagements, all those other places that you are in the world. And that's a great reminder. Well, Kate, this has been incredible. I can't thank you enough for your insight and expertise. And this is it's been a conversation I've been looking forward to for a long time. So thank you so much.
No, thanks so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.